This is the first, I guess, official Pineal Tribe recorded conversation podcast, webinar. I don't know what the terminology is these days. But it's the first conversation that we want to bring together. And the motivation for this really is that we formed an organization, Bjorn, myself, and three other friends of ours, Greg, Demir, and Alex, a few years back, called the Pineal Tribe. And the main function of the business is that we create transformational experiences for people who may be suffering from, a difficult childhood or just blockages in their life, or the feeling of limitation, or kind of anything that is not aligned with you living your perfect life. We create these experiences, these retreats, which facilitate that kind of journey of unfolding for somebody. Anyway, I give that frame of context to explain why we think our conversations might be interesting, because when we're at this retreat setting and we all get together and we really start pulling apart, the fabric of reality and putting the world to rights, we often get to the end of the conversation and go, wow, we should have recorded that. There was so much gold in there. But we never have. Now, our partner, Alex, is the founder of the Orson Boone podcast, which is amazing. Strongly recommend finding that. Just Google Orson Boone podcast and you'll get that. That's really, really good. And he talks a lot about medicines and plant medicines and everything else. For this setup, it won't always be myself and Bjorn. We may invite a third, a fourth, a fifth person. And we may even invite a member of the tribe, someone who's been through one of our transformational retreats to talk about an aspect of something or other. But to start off, this is really very experimental. We're seeing if it works. And if it does, fantastic. If it doesn't, okay, no problem with that. And we're really just going to pick a topic and go with it. No intention of where it will go. There's a beautiful old English word called coddywomple. And to coddywomple is to move in a vague direction with purpose. And I think we're probably going to coddywomple our way through this and just see where we end up. So Bjorn, thank you for joining me and for sitting through that really long intro. Lovely to be with you. And I've been thinking these last couple of days, of a topic. There were a couple that really kind of jumped out to me as being good at this moment in time. One of them is about personal identity, because I think we can all see that in one way or another, we have the tendency to identify and tie our identity in with the things that we do. So it might be your career and, you inherently tie your identity to the job title you have. It could be, the way that you look. It could be your political views. It could be your religious views. It could be. It kind of goes on and on, the things we can attach our identity to. And the reason this has been playing on my mind recently is that this has always been something that I've noticed that people do anyway. But it really feels like it's prevalent at the moment. It really feels like with the pandemic and with what seems to be in most places, the political spectrum becoming further and further away from each other and more extreme. And we have marches all around the world, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. There are so many points of separation at the moment, so many points of segregation. And it's something which was stark to me recently was, they were starting to call for segregation back on college campuses, racial segregation, and it's like, what's going on here? It all feels a bit troublesome. So this was a first topic I thought we could play with. I'm not sure.
Wonderful topic, and I would like to make 3 points about it. A personal identity is a very, very effective tool, but with all tools, you can use it to build something or to destroy something. When you choose a personal identity for yourself, like, for example, if you choose a personal identity of a vegetarian, it's easier to not eat meat because it's just who you are. You will not be tempted to go for a beautiful smelling steak or something because it's out of your life, basically. So you can use the concept to get to where you are. When you manage to assume the identity of a millionaire, it will just be easier to make money. But then there are the identities that you give yourself that you took on for example, when you have the identity of a smoker, or if you have the identity of a bad parent, it will be very hard to get out of the habits as long as the identity is active.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something to be conscious about, like what identities have I set for myself, and where would I like to make conscious choices of not doing that? Because this is exactly what the identity does. Choices are basically not thought about, but taken automatically.
Mm-hmm.
But this is exactly where you bring us with the third point. Like, if you want to manipulate people, if you want to have people not be conscious about what they're doing, what they're sharing, what they're embodying in the world, give them an identity that functions in the way that you want, and you just have them choose that identity, and they are not aware what they are creating with their choices.
No, absolutely. And the identity as a tool thing, I love the way you put that. I've never kind of thought of it in as such before, but you know from our conversations that I like gamification. Like whenever I'm conducting a boring task, you know, my career was in sales, and when I first started, you have to phone 150 people a day, like 145 of which tell you to F off. So if you have to make a game of it, otherwise it's going to kill you. So I saw the value of it very early on, and gamification is a form of exactly what you're saying there, assuming an identity. But to use it so proactively as a tool is really fascinating. You said about the smoking thing as well. One of our shared mentors used to make this example. If you still see yourself as a smoker trying to not smoke, eventually, because you are still a smoker, you're going to pick it back up again.
And this is exactly the thing about choices. As long as you have to each time choose not to smoke, it takes a little bit of willpower. And if you don't have to choose not to smoke, but you have the identity of a not smoker, you would have to choose to smoke, then it's just full of ease because you don't have to take the choice not to smoke.
Yeah. It moves away from that finite resource of willpower, which
exactly is very finite.
Very, very finite. And I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I was thinking that for some people that is a thrill. Like I used to work a lot when I worked in the City of London for people who would take they would wear their willpower and their ability to keep going even when it really is terrible what they're doing, like a badge of honor, you know. And so for some people, I think it's it feeds them to be in that situation. Perhaps there's self-affirmation that they're strong enough to continue doing it, some kind of significant, I don't know what comes from it, but for the vast majority of people, like that willpower being finite is the thing that results in gym memberships going for 2 months, diets completely falling down, New Year's resolutions crashing by the 3rd of Jan. You know? It's that difficult, isn't it?
Yes, and people who use their willpower to go beyond their limits, it's basically also just an identity thing. Like my identity that I can prove to the world that I can fuck over my body whenever I want to by going as far as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is here, you said something a second ago, which I agree with. It's this choice, because when we see identity as a tool that we can use in the context that you've just shared, like knowing how to use that tool is a pretty amazing power, because you
yes. The thing, it's not just about choice, because choices you can choose automatically or you can choose consciously, and it's about conscious choice. Like from my point of view, the identity is like a lot of default choices in one area, and you can design it. And the question is, where do I want to take conscious choices? Because this is what takes a little bit of energy. But from my point of view, it's basically why we're here. What this game is designed for. Like, where can I have conscious choices, and how can I create my life so that the choices that I take create a life that is interesting and full of joy and full of ease and full of glory.
And it is a really valuable point, that conscious choice thing, because as we're having this conversation, as I said, one of the things that brought this to the forefront of my thinking is just the observation that this kind of attachment to identity is more prevalent at the moment, or that at least that's the way it seems. And I think like the conscious choice thing is absolutely spot on. You know, are we able to stop and make a conscious choice to identify as something which is beneficial for us ultimately? And I think that, especially the way the media works, we know that it's a game of fear, but we also know that the way fear works, when we become scared, our body starts to produce certain chemicals which essentially set us up for responding to a danger situation, i.e. tiger attacks, cortisol is produced, I get stupid but really aggressive, decent, right? I get into an argument with my wife, cortisol is produced, I get stupid and really aggressive, not so decent. So we know that fear has its place, but in our current society, there's this real, that's the real epidemic or pandemic, is an epidemic of fear. That is really what strikes us. Now, the interesting thing is, again, with fear is when somebody is kept in that state of fear for a long period of time, when the body isn't designed to have cortisol in it for a long period of time. It's supposed to get in there, get a reaction, then the body clears it through. That's it.
The body doesn't mind. The body does just the body just gets used to it, and it says, okay, this is normal. Okay. The problem is you will never. It's the longer you stay in fear, the harder it is to get out of it. Well, because the body adapts.
There's the other piece as well, is the associated symptoms. So the body will adapt, but it will adapt at a less optimal level. So you may suffer with weight issues, you may suffer with insomnia, you may suffer with all these number of things. So yeah, you will adapt, but not in the limitless way that you should be. You know, there will be limitations which are built around it.
It's a different kind of life, but it's just a choice. It's not not like, it's an interesting choice to choose a life like that. Doesn't mean it's wrong. For example, getting into controversial topics, but if somebody on another plane really wants to get out of his body, wants the body to die, living a life of fear is a smart choice.
Mm-hmm.
Not a happy choice, or not something that feels easy, but it will help the body to destruct itself as fast as possible.
Mm. And when we hear that description, when we familiarize ourselves with that yeah, fear is a choice, we can live it, it will be fine, but we're not going to be functioning in full alignment with the way that we could be. It's clear why when we're in those states, it becomes more difficult to consciously make choices. You know, it's not only are we chemically less able to function at a high standard, but there is that classic thing when we're sent into fear, you want to go with the group. For a lot of people, that's the thing, isn't it? It's, you want to get with the group, you want to get that protection, that safety in numbers, which again just drives this whole identity thing. You know, oh my God, I feel terrible with the way the world is going. It's absolutely terrible. But, you know, I can align with these people and everything is their fault. Everything is their fault. Oh God, that makes me feel good. Maybe not exactly that, but that's kind of the flavor that I get with it when I look at it.
Yes, and there's also another point that even makes it stronger. When you're in fear, one of the fears that is ingrained in our system is the fear of being thrown out of our community, because in the past it would mean certain death. Mm-hmm. So when you're in fear, you have to look to your peer group and see, okay, what identities are they wearing, and I need to wear the same, because otherwise I will be thrown out.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting. It's such a good point that you make there when you touch on these core human fears, because when we really look at them and we realize that, okay, this is the story, it's made me scared. You know, why has it made me scared? Well, it has to connect to one of these four core human fears. When we actually drill into it, we think, fear of banishment, really? That's something to be terrified of. But as you say, because it's programmed in, it still creates the same sequence of causality afterwards. Once it's triggered, it still, you know, takes us through that fear process. And I guess the topic could naturally go in the direction of, is this current state of perpetual fear orchestrated? We're going into the conspiracy realm now, but is this orchestrated? I think you only have to look at the way the media operates to realize that from their perspective, God, yeah, it is. It generates revenue. People get scared. They become dependent on these publications to give them this their pain relief, which we know doesn't happen. It's just that kind of vicious cycle.
Yeah, I have two problems with the term conspiracy theory, but they might be different. Than one thing is, from my point of view, when somebody says this is a conspiracy theory, there's a connotation that this is bad, whatever it is, and I kind of disagree, because what we like, whenever the system processes something, whenever you, for example, let's assume somebody has taken over from their parents a deep fear of what happens in war, because they had it in their system. As a child, you're very open, you just take in everything that is around you, especially fears and stuff, because as a child you're very connected to source and it's just easy for you, and you try to help. So now you have it in your system. And when now something like a pandemic comes, where suddenly there's no toilet paper anymore and all stores are closed, and from many respects it very, very much is similar to war. And this can lead to a lot of release from the body, because you're back in the situation, you can just release it by surrendering into the fear. And from the outside it looks like you're suffering, and in the moment you think you are, but in the end you're releasing something for a better life, because assuming that we live in a mirror reality, what is inside of you creates your outside reality. So conspiracy theory, yes, but what if this is created by all of us for a perfect purpose that is actually wonderful? And the question is just for everybody individually, do you want to go with the cows, or do you want to be your own horse and truly be you and see for what it is, in the sense of, except for people that are ill, I don't know anybody who truly suffers from corona. It's just you suffer from watching the news, taking on identities that are not fitting for you and giving into fear. And the other thing about conspiracy theories is the universe is a very magical place. And if you allow yourself to believe for a moment that you create your reality, then on the one hand, you need very interesting constructs to create whatever is inside of us as a human species. On the other hand, especially when you think about conspiracy theory, if there is a reason for everything that it is in a way that it is, it also means it can switch very fast, in the sense of, if there are people behind this conspiracy, they could decide that it's over now. So whenever we as a collective consciousness change, it can change very fast.
That's observable at the moment, because it's been really fascinating to watch the general public's response during the COVID times, whereas at the very beginning, like 99% of people in social media were aligned with World Health Organization, aligned with their local government and everything else. And it was that 1% who were coming out and saying something, and everybody was slamming them. Pure virtue signaling. You can't say that, it's dangerous. Everything else that goes with it. But now it's like, it's not a 99-1 anymore. It really, really isn't. Some people who I consider to be very much aligned with, what the government tells them to do and everything, don't generally argue about it. At the very beginning, I remember having conversations with them, and I voiced a little bit of question marks, and the response was very much like, well, you're a fucking idiot then, aren't you? whoa, I guess we're not having that conversation. There just wasn't any room for them at all for that to be anything other than the accepted narrative. And now, you know, I'm having conversations with those same people, and they're very gingerly bringing it up again. Oh, you know, remember we were talking about it before? Yeah, I've had a bit more of a think about that. And yeah, I think there might be some value in that, some truth in what you said there. But it is interesting, isn't it? It's like how, and I think that what we've really seen over this period is, it's one thing driving people into fear. And I think that kind of debilitates people a lot of the time, for the vast majority of people. But the way that this has happened, the other side is it's triggering anger in people.
Yes.
And it's, you know, you can't go to your father's funeral, you can't go to this, you can't go to that, but then we'll happily sign a petition for 250,000 people to march in the street without masks. Like, there's enough to really anger people if they miss out on a moment that they really shouldn't have missed out on. And that, I think, if that wasn't there, I think that 99 to 1% thing may be more retained. I think it's this presence of anger and this feeling that people are really being disenfranchised through this process that's creating this rebalance. And it's interesting to see if that continues, because there would have to be a tipping point. And the funny thing is that as this has started to occur, we see social media companies essentially adhering to censorship, is what we see. Now, that always worries me, Bjorn. Like, if there are two narratives out there, and I'm absolutely bought into narrative A, totally bought in. However, it becomes clear that the people pushing narrative A are using propaganda techniques and censorship in order to get their message across. Immediately it raises flags. Like, why the need? You know, if there are dishonest actions going, normally dishonest actions are there to hide dishonest things. You know, if somebody is coming from honesty and integrity, normally transparency is just the easiest thing to go with. It's interesting to see how it unfolds, because I don't think we're looking at a linear unfolding here, as we're with most things in life. I think it's very open.
Yeah, it is interesting, but it's also, maybe this is the perfect point to loop back to the beginning. There's a quote, I don't know who said it, but it's very dear to my heart, and it's helped me a lot in many situations. It's never attribute to malice what could be stupidity or laziness.
Nice.
And, you know, if somebody has a point of view that some message is the truth with a capital T, and the one thing that he needs to do is share the truth, and he puts on the identity of being the one that needs to share this truth, he doesn't take conscious choices anymore. He will use whatever means necessary to reach the one objective of the identity, which is sharing the message. And it's not about values, it's not about, and that's just what happens.
Yeah.
But I have to say one thing about that. What if it's not wrong? Because whenever we say that somebody is manipulated into fear by the media, for example, there's an assumption in there. And that assumption is that that person is weak and can be manipulated, and therefore is a victim of the media. And what if that being, and every being out there, is an infinite being that might in a moment forgets to take conscious choices, but it's still a choice not to take a conscious choice. And it's not a victim, it's just an experience. And what if it's just beautiful if a lot of people choose fear for now in order to rise out of the ashes, open for a new life, a life that is way better than mediocre life before that, now going through fear and then knowing that this is worse than mediocre, but then not going back to mediocre, but going back to grandiosity by consciously choosing, for example, their identities.
Interesting. Like as you were talking, I have the Hawkins scale of calibration just behind here. Anyone who doesn't know the Hawkins scale of calibration, Dr. David Hawkins, I would recommend his work strongly. Firstly, Letting Go, good starting point. Then Power versus Force. But you could actually search on YouTube, like Oprah Winfrey did this amazing interview with him, and there's really good content. Strong recommendation. But there's him and his team over a few decades essentially mapped out the spectrum of human emotion. They created a scale, and from the least life affirming, like essentially death, up into the level of absolute godlike whatever, and everything in between. This is mapped, and it's a really, really interesting study. And I think for anybody, especially who's just being introduced to the fact that there may be something more out there, Hawkins' work is brilliant because it's so embedded in scientific study. It pacifies the logical side of the mind so that the more creative and excitable sides of the mind can go and play. But as Bjorn was talking and you were saying, and the reason I referenced this is one of the things that you start to understand when you look at the scale of human emotion is that the further down the scale you get, the closer you get to your things like guilt, shame, fear, and things like this, the weaker you become. The less able you are to get up and get things done. So I think it is absolutely fascinating what you're saying, Bjorn, because while fear, what stretched over a long period of time and in the wrong context perhaps can be troublesome, if you're feeling fearful after feeling apathetic, let's say, then it is an amazing step up. There's so much more energy that can happen at that stage. So it feels like there's this really interesting piece. There's also another thing that hits me as well, is that my experience of life over the last few years, there's been some really cool things that have happened. Like, the retreats we organize, there's been magic moments like being in South Africa with you and Greg and different things, and getting together in London and getting together. It's like all these different moments that are really, really like, wow, they were so cool. But they're fully appreciated because they sit next to the moments that aren't so cool. It's that polarity of experience, isn't it? It's that how can you know up if you don't know down? How can you know light if you don't know dark? So on and so forth. How can you know joy, love, and connection, that delicious stuff, if you don't know the opposite? There's this really interesting thing that came to my mind there when you said about fear, and it could be the kind of thing that's the catalyst. It's like if you were below fear, then it's going to have more energy than where you were. Yeah. If you were higher than, let's say you were coming from a higher level, and this whole pandemic and everything that's happened, it's just sent you inside yourself. I would like to think that because people have experienced something better, that they wouldn't be able to spend a long time in fear, because after a period of time, it had become far too uncomfortable knowing what
Yes,
vibration is like.
Exactly that. Like a higher level on the scale of consciousness from Hawkins is not better than a lower level. It has less power to create change in the world. Therefore, like a lot of people in fear, they look dangerous, and it's certainly uncomfortable for them, but they are not that powerful to create change. But the lower you are on the scale of consciousness, personally, at one moment in time, the less comfortable it is, I would say. And therefore, yes, exactly this. It was in Conversations with God by Neil Walsh, I think. Maybe somewhere he says, well, sometimes it's not good to take the pain away too early, because people need some pain in order to change. And also I've been in the bubble books. But anyways, discomfort is good for conscious choice of something else.
Yeah. We talk about this a lot, actually. We both have a friend who found his spiritual path at a very young age. And, you compare that to, say, for example, you and I, who went completely disconnected from anything spiritual, anything woo, anything like that. You know, we built careers in cities. We did the thing. And we realized that we were, in some respects, very happy doing what we were doing at that level, but ultimately weren't, you know, didn't experience that true fulfillment. And I think for myself personally, living, you know, my first 10, 15 years as an adult, being fundamentally unhappy and unfulfilled and disconnected, it was kind of like it was pulling the elastic band back. You've heard me use this metaphor before. Like I had 15 years of pulling this elastic band back, so that it was finally let go. Like, it just absolutely flew. But my friend I referenced a moment ago, who found the spiritual journey early, like he doesn't really have that polarity of experience. So there feels in moments like, and these are his words, it's difficult to appreciate what he has because he's only ever had that kind of thing. So I think there's definitely huge value in, as you say, like nothing's better or worse than the other. You were using that to refer to the scale of consciousness, but in terms of experience, we know that generally nothing's better or worse than anything else. Now that's fucking controversial. I'm at the very start of my spiritual journey saying that to someone, and they said, "Hold on a minute, like how is rape equal to a wedding?" And I'm like, I didn't fully understand this from a conceptual point of view, kind of thing. And again, to really hold my own in that conversation was challenging. But like I only have to look at like 2.5, 3 years ago, I went through a really personal traumatic experience. You were very present with it at the time, and it buckled me. Like it put me down for a couple of months. I was messed up. Like I wouldn't change that now. Like not a chance in the world. Like going through that really deep, dark experience not only kind of galvanized me and created some extra strength and resilience in order to be able to do that, but like it made me see every day afterwards as almost like a birthday. It's like every day was my birthday. It was amazing because I get to experience X, Y, and Z.
Yes, and many times when we look from the outside on somebody, we just assume that something is good or bad, but those are our projections and our judgments. For example, the example with the wedding and the rape. Imagine a woman that likes sex and actually would like to have sex, and a rapist that is actually caring, just that he doesn't look for if she wants to or not. Still rape, still not, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but for the woman it's not, it's okay, let's say. And imagine a wedding, for example in India, with a lady that has to marry a husband that she already knows will be violent, and she's still going through with it because she does not want to disappoint her family, and therefore this is basically the day that she signs her freedom away. Like if I have a choice of what I would experience, I would go for the rape.
Yeah.
A lot just our projections of what we think something feels like. And you know, when we think about the poor kids in Africa that don't have enough food, if you look at the moment when they get a nice bowl of rice and they are just completely happy in the moment. Yes, contrast frames are strange things. And what if everybody just chooses his experience every moment of the day, and especially his reactions to intensity? And when you experience intensity, for example, the intensity of fear, and judges as bad, and therefore don't go out of your house because everywhere are just people who are going to kill you because they carry a deadly virus, and you judge yourself in the situation as the victim that cannot leave the house anymore, and you cannot do anything but watch TV because what is there to do inside of your house? or somebody who says, okay, there's a pandemic outside. What can I do with my time? I could learn meditation. I could study. I could repaint. I could start writing a book. I could start reading. I could long vacation that just happens to be inside of my room. And if you want to compare that, for example, to Gandhi, who really did a lot of very great writing because he happened to spend a lot of time in prison, his prisons are most of the time probably less comfortable than your home.
Yeah. There's another, like, as we keep going into this, there's layers. It's like anything, layers of the onion. And because there's the other side. There is a poet called Robert Bly. He was a big, when he was alive, he was a big voice in sort of men's work and the men's movement, and bringing awareness to the fact that, you know, men can be vulnerable as well. And there's this really beautiful quote that our shared friend Rory Kilmartin introduced me to, which is where Robert Bly says, you know, about letting the wounded be the healers. And I think this is incredibly valuable as well, because one of the things that I've noticed in going through difficult times is sometimes it's like, and I always try and play the game of finding a lesson. Sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's not so clear. But like, if I think about the really, really challenging shit that's happened to me in my life, like the really, really hard stuff that I kind of think, man, like, I can't believe I got through that, like, with my sanity intact. Although sanity intact is, I guess it's it's up for question.
Yeah. Did you?
Honest about that. Or kind of how didn't I die? Like, in certain situations, it's true. You know, I've been very open about the fact that in my like late teens, early 20s, I got really, really into party drugs, cocaine and MDMA, ecstasy mainly. And yeah, there were moments when I took enough to kill a small horse. Like, and I look at these moments, and they were followed by moments of real low self-loathing. Like, because I knew what was happening was wrong and I shouldn't be doing it and everything else. And these fucking low moments, real deep, dark stickiness, like dark night of the soul shit in a big, big way. However, since going through those things, and since going through the big personal challenge I had a couple of years ago, I found myself working one-on-one with a lot of people who have those same problems, or had those same problems, but have gone through them and are really, really damaged by it and struggling to. And it's incredible, because by going through those challenging experiences myself, and connecting to the value, connecting to the lesson, connecting to what I've taken and where the growth came from, it's turned it almost like into a superpower. I love to use those terms, because for me, like, you can use something to elicit some change or inspire someone to heal themselves or whatever. That is a superpower. If you don't have to throw drugs into their system to make them happier, you can just do it with a few words. That is a superpower. And that's another thing as well. So this is, you know, I was speaking with somebody a short while ago, and she in her youth had sexual trauma, let's call it. She was abused at a very young age. And for 10, 15 years of her life, she didn't understand it. She blamed herself, she blamed her mum, she blamed her dad, she blamed everybody around her. And, you know, she was very much in this space. And it was only when the same thing happened to her cousin, who was 10 years younger than her, that she stepped in, and it came through her, as she put it. You know, she didn't feel like she was actively there thinking about what she should say next. She'd been there, she had lived it. She was healing from her wound, and she was healing herself and her cousin simultaneously. So there's this very beautiful thing that can occur when somebody goes through some hardship. And what excites me most about that is it creates an equation. You being a mathematician, probably looking with one eyebrow raised right now, which is, the greater the state of chaos that society finds itself in, and thus the greater turmoil and fear that one finds themselves in, and thus the greater opportunity for traumatic experience, the greater the opportunity for the creation of healers, people who can step forward and make a change.
Yes, I completely agree. In the sense of, well, what are we actually here for? And from my point of view, there's a lot of processing wounds, and everything that you have processed, you can share.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the biggest contribution that we can be for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly. Those with deep wounds in my book are those who have the biggest gift to give, because the processing of that is something that can be so valuable and healing for others when they share it. And sharing doesn't need to be complicated, because the thing is, you carry that healing inside of you, and it's not about what you say and how you say it, it's about how you be with yourself.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it really is. It really is fascinating, isn't it? Because if we come back, if we full circle back to the identity piece at the beginning, and I think when something happens to us, when we go through trauma, when we find ourselves in a difficult situation, is this a personal projection? Yeah, it probably is. Go with it. It's easy to slip into victimhood. Let me reword that. When I have something bad happen to me, I find it easy to slip into victimhood and start playing the victim. And the fascinating thing is it's like victimhood is like, it's like stepping in concrete or quicksand or whatever you want to call it, because you remove ownership, you remove accountability. As soon as you remove those things, these are like the two primary mechanisms for learning from our mistakes. Without them, everything falls apart. So this tendency to get pulled into victimhood when we're in these moments and identify as the victim of a situation basically just keeps that treasure chest locked, that treasure chest that in it has our superpower. It just keeps it locked. It's like, it's almost like, the greatest ability we can have is the ability to be able to reframe those things that have happened and connect to some kind of lesson or learning. I shared, in fact, I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to do the thing that you're not supposed to do in these things and go on the internet and have a look at something. But I shared an Alan Watts quote yesterday. And as is usually the case, he has a way of saying things that just makes me super happy. So I just wanted to read this one now, if I can find it. There we go. Okay. We must abandon completely the notion of blaming the past for any kind of situation we are in, and reverse our thinking and see that the past is always flows back from the present. That now is the creative point of life. So you see, it's like the idea of forgiving somebody. You change the meaning of the past by doing that. The present is always changing the past. Now, how amazing is that as a notion? It's like nothing that ever happened to you in your past has to debilitate you. Nothing that ever happened has to be a cross to bear. If we can understand what Mr. Watts talks about here and how to recontextualize and reframe these things and see them for the value that they hold rather than just the pain that they caused.
Beautiful.
It's always hard to follow Alan Watts, isn't it? Like it's risky quoting Alan Watts in any conversation, because then you just have to sit there afterwards and go,
okay, done.
But I kind of think, for me anyway, I think I'm kind of at a point of coming close to completion with the conversation. Like, I think it's a really big one that we could sit down and chew over for a really, really long time. But I think there's a lot there to touch on. There's a lot there to connect to. And it feels like after letting the dust settle in our respective minds after this conversation, we could probably come back, revisit it, and you know, have a really interesting, deeper conversation about some of these aspects. But do you feel there's anything else that you want to share now, that you want to add into the mix before we complete?
There's one thing I would like to rephrase, and it was already said, but whatever happened to you in the past, you can have the identity of this happened to me and therefore I am that. Or you can have the identity of I have the gift of this in my past and this is what I can create with it.
Amazing. Amazing. Because that is the difference, isn't it? That's the difference between identifying and not identifying with it, which is the same as you owning it or it owning you.
Exactly.
A beautiful point to conclude on. Well, Björn, thank you. It's been fun. We'll have some more of these conversations in the future. For anyone that's tuned in, thank you for watching. If there's anything you want us to discuss in particular, any questions you have, any feedback you want to send across, please feel free to reach out. Nick@pineal.org or Bjorn@pineal.org. You'll be able to pop us an email directly if you so wish. Otherwise, stay tuned, because until someone tells us this is crap and we shouldn't do it anymore, we're going to keep doing it. So thank you very much, and have a good day.